What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over part 2 of blocking. This will be blocking while you're walking in the opposite direction of your opponent. So, last time in episode 1, we were able to press a button and be able to block on the spot. Manual blocking. In this case, we're going to implement some block stun and also do, like I said, blocking while walking away from your opponent. So, if I take player 1 and I'm walking away and player 2 hits him, he will automatically go into a block state, he will have some block stun, and then he will be able to move once the attack is finished. And once the block stun has gone away. So, we're going to get right into it, but if you need to watch episode 1 to kind of catch up on how we did our initial block logic, then I will leave a link to the iCard in the top right corner. Okay. So, let's get started. I'm just going to move this down a bit because it's a little bit too close. Okay, there's a few things we need to do with the code, but usually I would start with the code. I am going to actually add an extra parameter to the create active hitbox function we have. So basically, if this is one of your first episodes in this tutorial, we are very far into the tutorial. So if you need to watch the entire series or get caught up, I will leave a link right here in this iCard to the very first episode that we had on the fighting game tutorial. This is episode 25, I believe, so we're quite far in. But anyway, in the create active hitbox, where we're spawning our hitbox that's going to do damage, we want to add a block stun time. Now last time we added a hit stun time, or 2 times ago, I believe it was by now, but we want to have a block stun time as well, because first of all, block stun, hit stun can be different in times, and also because we need to know how long we want to block the player from using inputs after they go into the block state. Now, just to be clear, you can use this on the static block, on the manual block as well, and force them out of it afterward, or force them not to be able to move or undo their block afterward. So, add a new variable. So go into your create active hitbox function. You can see I've added a new input variable called block stun time. Also made it a float, the same as hit stun time. If you saw hit stun time, we're doing the exact same thing. So, you press the little plus, block stun time, change this to a float, then it'll be here. You can drag it, make it all pretty. This is the block stun time. I'm bringing along the bottom. This was hit stun time, and what we're going to do is we're just going to set our block stun time to the value that we had in our function. Now, this block stun time is the block stun time for the hitbox specifically. So you can see this is all one line. This is all the stuff from the hitbox. So, I mentioned it in the last episode, but if you go into your code class, in your hitbox actor, you can see I've added a variable called block stun time. The same as I've added hit stun time, we have block stun time. So, by default, you can set it to be whatever you want. Of course, I set it to be 0, because I don't want proximity boxes and such to have this. And since both proximity boxes and active strike boxes go off of the hitbox actor, I want it to be 0 by default. Then, whatever value it is that I put into here, or that I put into right here, is what my block stun time will be for this active hitbox. Okay, so once you've set that for your hitbox, then you'll be able to actually use this when determining how long the player should be blocked out, if you will, of doing inputs because they're stuck in their block animation. So, there are some things we need to do in the state machine, but I'm not going to do them yet. I'm going to go to the code next. I do just want to show you, I do have a non-static block for this. I'm going to change the duration of this block effect to match our block stun time. That way it's a lot easier to see visually what exactly is going on. You can do this with a static block like we had for our manual block. So no big deal either way. Just letting you guys know, little heads up. Okay, so if you go into the code, and the only other thing we're going to have to change today in the code is in the fighter template character. we need to make it so essentially we know if we're colliding with a proximity hitbox or if we're going to be taking damage. This first part is kind of just to make things clean. It doesn't necessarily have to happen, to be honest, but I'd recommend making it happen. It will make our lives easier in the long run. So what I'm doing is making a function called void collided with proximity hitbox. Very specific, but it's got a very specific purpose. Basically, our proximity hitbox isn't going to have a lot of things that our active or our strike hitbox is going to have, right? So, because of this, and for those who aren't familiar, the strike hitbox I'm referring to is the hitbox that does damage. I've heard it called a few different things for the actual term. I just use that because that's what I'm familiar with from working on a fighting game in the past, not because I'm saying it's the right term. So feel free to correct me with a word that you think is better suited for it. But yeah, it's the hitbox that does damage. So collide with proximity hitbox. The proximity hitbox doesn't do damage, but it is going to determine if we're blocking or if we should be blocking when we're walking the opposite direction, right? So if we're walking to the left, well, and our enemy's on the right, so we're walking away from him and he hits us, we need to know if we're getting hit from the damage or the proximity. Because if we're getting hit from the proximity, we should block. If we're getting hit from the actual damaging part of the attack, well, it's too late to be blocking. We want to make sure we actually soak up that hit. What we're going to do is make these two functions. So U function blueprint callable just means we can call it from blueprint, remember. We already have take damage, but add float block stun time right here. Because again, block stun time and hit stun time could be different, and most of the time they are. Go into your CPP class. Here, I've made this function. Collide with proximity hitbox. In collide with proximity hitbox, we're going to be extrapolating some stuff that I did and take damage because it ended up kind of making this function too bloated for my liking. We're essentially just looking to see if we're backing away from our opponent. So if we're moving left and we're not flipped, so player 1 on the left side facing the right is considered not flipped in my game. So if we're moving left and we're not flipped, well then we are walking backward. So we are going away from our opponent. End of story. Or if we're moving right and we are flipped, so is flipped by default would be on the right facing the left, like player 2 starts by default. So if we're moving right and we are flipped, then we're also backing away from our opponent. Either way, if we hit the proximity hitbox, if we collide with the proximity hitbox while we're walking away from our opponent, then we want to make sure we go into the blocking state. And I've added a log just saying the character is auto blocking, so we can test this and I can show you the functionality. And take damage, I just basically do a check. This is basically the same as you've already seen. I have a few additional things I've added down below. But just basically check if the character is blocking or not. Because we have this separate function now, we will now know if we were blocking prior to the take damage function, since the proximity hitbox always fires before the strike hitbox. So if we're not blocking, then we're going to take our damage as usual. We're going to get stunned as usual, and the other player is going to register their hit as usual. Now, something good to note here, I changed this up a bit. So last time I had stun the player above the stun time equals hit stun time, and just began the stun. Now, there is something with Unreal, and there might be a solution that I'm not familiar with, but the way this timer works, this get timer manager for the begin stun to end stun we made last time, stun times of 0, or anytime you have a timer with a time of 0 to start out, you'll never actually reach the end stun function. It'll never think it completed because it starts with 0 and doesn't have to end at 0, right? It starts where it should end, and I think it doesn't ever subtract. I never actually looked into it, but basically, if you start this at 0, you'll never call this function. It's like this timer never completes, it kind of gets stuck. So I added some additional safety checks for both when we're taking damage and for our block stun, so hit stun and block stun time. So basically just check if stun time is greater than 0. This will just kind of alleviate some possible issues that could come up where you could get stunned or locked in an animation basically forever. So just do that, but otherwise this is the same. I didn't change anything with it. I just kind of changed the order and added this if check. Now, else, if we are blocking, so we did all this in part 1, blocking on the key press, but we never had a block stun time. Well, now we do. So stun time equals block stun time. Basically, we want to make sure that we are also stunned when we do our opposite direction blocking, right? I want to call it auto block, but it's not really auto block. So if you see me stumble with the words a bit, auto block is when you start blocking and you kind of block the rest of the attacks in a certain amount of frames between each attack. It's more like backing away from opponent block, okay? So that's what I'm referring to here. Basically, our stun time is going to equal our block stun time, because regardless if we're manually blocking on key press or walking away and blocking, we want to be blocked for a certain amount of time. That way we can't get hit and instantly punish within like 0 frames, you know, on the same frame or 1 frame away. We want to make sure that we have some block stun time. So, just like we did with hit stun time, we can still use the stun time variable. You should never be hit stunned and block stunned with the same character at the same time. So feel free to use this variable. It's perfectly safe as long as you're using it correctly. Then, as usual, do your little if check to make sure stun time is greater than 0 so you don't get frozen. And then if it is, begin your stun. Now, I do have an additional check in here even, and I should probably do this here as well. But if stun time is not greater than 0, so if it's 0 or less than 0, then set it to default. You don't have to do this, I don't believe. I did add it as an additional check just in case. It should be fine to take out, but right now it's not causing any problems to keep in, so you might want to keep it in as a little bit of additional debugging if you need to. Because I had some issues originally with the stun time being 0 from the proximity hitbox, and I forgot about Unreal's timer weirdness, so that was my fault. That's why I had this here, but I wanted to show you. You can kind of use this to force it to go back to the default state if the stun time is 0 anyway. So there you go. Just a note, begin stun, end stun. We went over this last time, but basically it makes it so you can't move or do anything. Waits for the starts the timer, waits for the stun time to reach 0, and then calls the end stun function, which sets you back to the default state, and then makes you be able to move and attack again. Lastly, and just an additional note, but I like to keep you guys in the loop, I did make some changes to the move right function. I started making this a little bit too complex when in reality I should have just used can move, but I took out a bunch of these variables, so now it's only you can move right if you can move and you're not crouching and you're not blocking. You could probably take out blocking. In fact, you definitely could with what's going on right now. I'm trying to think for the future what things we might use, so I'm keeping blocking and crouching in here. The rest aren't necessary for anything I can think of. Feel free to adjust those if you want, but really it won't actually hurt anything. Any states where you're not going to be moving right or left anyway, it doesn't really matter to check them because you can't do it regardless. Make sure you build like such, and then wait for it to succeed and all that goodness. And then we will go into the anim state machine. So compile if you need to. When you get back into Unreal, you most likely will. Sometimes it likes to actually catch up for you, but most of the time it does not. In our Hitbox actor BP, we are going to now do the logic to make sure we're calling that collide with proximity hitbox function. In your check collision function, make a switch for your hitbox type just like we did up above. If it's proximity that is colliding with the player, call our collided with proximity hitbox. If it's strike, call the take damage as we're normally doing. Make sure you add the block stun time now. That should be in your take damage and in your hitbox. If the node for block stun isn't here, right click and hit refresh nodes and it should show up. When you add a variable to a function in Unreal, it doesn't always add the input here until you refresh the node if you already had it in the blueprint graph. There you go. The proper function should be called when we have a collision, so that's good. in the mutant anim BP, now we already made our active hitbox, so we're good logic-wise, but we do need to make the state machine work. This one's pretty simple, especially because it's basically the exact same as the manual block. Now, understand, I'm calling it auto block here. Probably don't do that, because I just mentioned why. So let's rename it on the spot. We'll call it block. We're just going to call this block, and I'll leave this as manual block. I think that actually does make sense. So, if not, doesn't matter. Just know that block, this right here, and what was being called auto block is referring to block when you're walking away from your opponent, okay? Now, we only want to get to this state if we're in the walking backward state. So, walking backward. If we're walking backward, the only way we can get the block is if we enter the block state. So as usual, our character state from our mutant character reference is going to come in clutch here. We use this for pretty much everything in our anim BP, and it's great. Essentially, if you're walking backward, you can only go into this state if you're blocking. So remember, we set that variable for if we're blocking or not right here. Essentially, if this determines, yep, he's walking backward and he's, you know, getting hit with the proximity hitbox, then we're going to go into the blocking state. So we trigger this automatically. Then, when we come back out, we play our block animation. So I have, again, mutant center block here is what this is called, but it's an actual animated block, not just a static block. You don't need any anim notifies or anything. Plug it into your output pose. However, I mentioned this before, so I'm going to be using the stun time for the play rate basis of the block. That way you can see that I can't move, but also you can kind of visualize how long the block stun is. So click on your animation, go to play rate basis, and hit the little eyeball. It will allow you to plug something into it. Grab your stun time from your mutant character reference and plug it into the play rate basis. We will play around with that at the end of the video to show you kind of the different times and what it looks like. Lastly, to go back from block to idle, because that's the state we're going to end up in once the block stun is finished and we're done blocking, I do this logic. So, this might be a little bit weird. You're like, why don't you just do not moving? And that's a good point. So the issue is, I was leaving it like this, where you would get stunned and you could be holding a button. It would pick up on that right away, and then you would start moving left or right and get stuck in the stun animation until you release the button. Now, you could do it where you just have it, they can't move until after the stun time in the code. So instead of this timer being exactly the stun time, you could add a little bit of time to this. That way they can't move until this animation is finished or until they receive some sort of anim transition thing. So like you could have it on this node. If you scroll down on the right here, notifications, you could probably have something on the end transition event. You can handle it a few different ways. The easiest way for me to understand was just, well, we know that they're going to return to idle anyway. And I mean, it doesn't hurt us to have a few possible ways to return, because we only are ever going to want to return to idle from the block that we're doing. So the easiest way for me was to just check if we're not moving, moving left, or moving right, and if we are, return back to idle. So not moving, moving left, moving right. If it's equal to any of these, we go back to idle. And then we'll go to the appropriate one afterward. So just to show you what it looks like, we come in here and we can block manually, and I can eat up that damage. And here I will show you the output log as well. Okay, so we are taking reduced damage. You see this? And you can see the block stun. It actually kicks out my static block now with the changes we made. So you might not want that. You can check for it. You can change it if you want. But I'm still holding the button. It just kicks me out every time, which I think is good. I actually prefer that. But I'm not sure if that's a standard. Usually, in a lot of games, you can't really manually block, or block on key press, so that's fine. The block on key press is more of a functionality thing. I wanted to show how to do blocking mechanics, and then we got into the more specific stuff. So there you go. But now, if you're walking away, you see I get hit, I can't move, so I'm still holding left when I get hit here, but I don't move until my animation is complete. You can see there's no weirdness where I'm, you know, trying to walk away and then getting stuck in my block state or anything like that. And you can see in the output log down below, it says the character is auto-blocking. Again, not really the right term, but it'll work. Just as long as you know the character is blocking while walking away is what the character is auto-blocking means. And this will work for player 2 as well. So, whoops, that's not what I want to do. So, go here. And you can see he also gets stunned, waits for his animation to complete, and then he can continue walking again. Alright. Lastly, what we're going to do is play around with the block stun times, because we played around with the hit stun times a bit, but the block stun times are also fun to see. So, if you go into, where am I trying to go? Go into your create active hitbox. No, sorry. Go into the event graph of the anim BP, and set this value to be whatever you want. I had it as 0.3. You can make it 3, and you can see it's going to be a very long block. I'm going to start this up. Walk this guy over here, say, and then he does a very slow motion block. I can't move this whole time, but once it's done, I go back to normal operation. That's essentially what block stun is. This is a very slow motion. You wouldn't ever put someone in that late a block stun unless you're like the Flash or something, I guess. But, yeah. There you go. You change this back to whatever value you want. I'm going to keep like 0.3 because whatever. I don't know a lot about actual frame data in terms of what are good values. So I just kind of put whatever. Feel free to actually figure out a good value for that. But, yeah. So anyway, note that this is in seconds as well, not frames. So if you do want to get any sort of frame data, you could do frames per second and do a calculation for that. Not too bad. I'm not going to get into it now because we're going to have a whole video on converting all of our times to frames in one simple step. So don't worry. Alright guys, so I think that's it for today, but now you should be able to block to your heart's content, both manually or by, you know, manually on key press or by walking away from your opponent while they attack you, which is great news. Both players 1 and 2 should be able to block, and you should have animations and block stun times that go with it. In the next episode, I think we're going to get to launchers. That's a very popular one that's been kind of chilling in the back there for a bit, so we'll probably get to launchers. Yeah, it's going to be fun. Alright guys, so I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed and this video helped you, please subscribe. It's the most important thing you can do for this channel. It's the way you can help me the most, so I'd really appreciate it. It lets me know that I'm doing the right thing and you guys are learning from it, which I also appreciate. So, if you'd like to come join us on Discord, we can assist you with any issues you had as well. So if anything I said was confusing, or if I forgot to mention something specific, like, oh, I didn't, you know, you have to click this box, and I didn't mention it, because it's possible, it's happened a few times, people have called me out on it, which, please do that. If I missed it, people should know. But if you want to let me know about that, or if you missed something, or if I missed something, and you want to join the Discord for help, we can send pictures and videos to get y'all sorted out. We've got over 110 members now, so thank you guys so much for joining and helping out with this wonderful community. We'll gladly get you set up if you had any issues. The link is in the description. If you want to come support us on Twitch, Shawnthebro27, so twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27, I should say, is the official link. It's in the description. Can't write it in the iCard because YouTube is weird, but basically we do Souls Wednesday, which is a Dark Souls-esque game every Wednesday, and Resident Evil Friday, which is becoming Horror Games Friday once we are finished with all the Resident Evils. We are currently on Resident Evil 4 at the time of writing this video. So, yeah, come join us if you want. Come give us some support, hang out with us. It's a really fun time. Last time they made me wear about 15 pairs of socks on my hands at once. It was miserable. Okay, guys, that's it for me for today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.